All right. Looks like we're at time, so we will get underway here. Thanks again for everyone for joining us here today for our Tag Inspector webinar series. We've had a number of them over the past couple months where we've been going through just some basics of tag management, what tags are, how they work, creating a tag governance policy, um, as well as leveraging tag management systems and some overviews around what those are, how they work, and why it's really critical to use one. One thing that's been referenced a lot of times, I know that I've done it, and we have a lot of clients and people that I've been speaking with that are wanting to enhance their capabilities around tags, pixels, tracking, both in the context of analytics, as well as with other third-party tools and digital marketing efforts that they're doing. One thing that's consistently come up is the data layer. The data layer, what we'll be covering obviously here today, just going through some of the basics, how it works, what it is, how to leverage it with your tag management system, and why it's so important. A little bit about us and myself, your presenter. As many of you know, Tag Inspector is our tool for automated tag monitoring, data collection validation, as well as tag auditing. It is a product of InfoTrust LLC. On the InfoTrust side, we do web analytics, consulting work, tag management, work with clients, as well as product development, with Tag Inspector obviously being one of those. Over 2,000 sites analyzed and supported annually. 30 plus digital marketing and training programs a year. Those are the formal programs. Obviously, a lot of other good content, such as these webinars. We also have offices in Cincinnati, in the US, as well as in Dubai. Quick little tidbit about me. I am Lucas. That's a photo of me there. I am our Tag Inspector project manager, and I also do a lot of tag management consulting work. For our agenda today, a quick overview of what the data layer is, how it works, what it looks like. Um, we'll get into a little bit of the importance, so why you should be really leveraging this and have a data layer really built out on your site. We'll go through the structure of the data layer, what that should look like, some of the critical data points. So what does every site need to make sure that they have contained within there to really be able to leverage and use that. We'll talk about leveraging a tag or the data layer with a tag management system, which is critical. And then also get into a little bit of the information for implementation, just base level for what that looks like, and then we'll wrap up with a few questions. For questions, on the right side of your screen, there should be like a little question pane. So if you have any questions at all, just drop them in there as we go through this, and I will get to as many as I can at the end. If I don't get to any, I'll definitely follow up with you individually to see if I can answer that. So first, as we get into it, just an overview. So what is the data layer? Um, Borrowed this great visual. It's actually from Telium, which is a tag management system, but it can really show exactly how this works. So there at the top level is your website. There's a lot of information on there, obviously. If you're an e-commerce site, you have product information, which would include product name, ID, price. There's information about the page. What page is it? What section of the site is it in? Information about users that you can pull down. So obviously within their browser, they have information, and you can set a cookie for client ID, user ID, things like that. Are they logged in? Are they not logged in? A lot of information to be had there. Um, and then as well as information for your content. Obviously, you're tagging a lot of the creative that you have on your websites to show what it is that someone's looking at. Just contextual information about blog posts or content articles that you might have. There's a lot there, and it's all over the place. And that's where that data layer comes in. So you can think of the data layer as a layer of data, interestingly enough, but just where everything's organized. All of that information that's available on the page is in one place in one standard structure that you can then go in and grab and use and plug into the different tags, the different scripts that you're running as you're collecting that information. So as opposed to having to scrape the page or go to all sorts of different areas on the site, you can handle that on the back end, put all of that information in one place in that data layer, and then be able to leverage it. So how it works is it plugs into essentially the page in your different backend systems to pull all of those data points that are disparate, that are all over the place, and put them in that one standard structure to be utilized. Here's just a quick little example of what that looks like. The data layer, it's an array with different objects in there that contain those different data points. So here we have some information about the page, about the product that's being looked at, as well as some different events. This is an example from a GTM data layer. So you'll see there that object one, gtm.js, that's just a standard timing event that GTM will push in there. Other tag management systems will have other defaults that they will set in there, but you will leverage those, and we'll get into it a little bit more when it comes to triggering or firing different tags. In terms of a real world example to kind of illustrate what the data layer is and how exactly it's working, a lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the situation on the left. So everything in the garage, all the tools that you would need, say you want to undertake a home improvement project. You're trying to renovate a room, so you need different tools just in order to be able to put the different pieces together. In a typical sense, and what many people's situations look like, both in their garage as well as on their website, everything's there. Everything's there that they need, but it's all over the place. You have to go search through and find it. It's difficult to pull it out. It's difficult to find it and then use it for the application. So there's a lot of effort that goes into just organizing everything each time you want to go through and undergo a different project. That illustration on the right is obviously a nice organized workbench where you have all the tools that you need in order to be able to complete the project. In the context of your home improvement project, it's these tools. In the context of your website, it is all of those different tools or data points that you need to be able to complete the tracking efforts with the various different platforms that you're working with. So the left is a website with no data layer, essentially, and then on the right there is everything nice, clean, organized in one place, aka having it well organized in the data layer. The last piece here in terms of like what it is the application within a tag management system. And we'll get into how to really leverage with the tag management system. But by having all of that information within the data layer, you can just point that tag management system and all of the tags, pixels you are managing within there to that to really leverage the variables, the dynamic pieces that you're inserting into the scripts to be able to send up, as well as triggers, firing rules, based it upon the events that are being pushed to the data layer, and then the tags themselves to be able to contain those variables and those triggers and firing rules that you have set up. Getting into a little bit of the importance of the data layer, in this kind of harkens back to that point we just made in terms of organization. But the number one thing is that clean data organization. So being able to have everything clean, have everything in one place, have it all be in that standard format. So you know where it is, you know what is there when you're going in and, can I do this? Can I not do this? You have one central place to check. It's immediately known, and if you need to put some additional data points in there, you can do that. So you have that central place for everything, which makes it just one thing to reference, both for different tags and different standards there, as well as it makes troubleshooting and management super, super easy. You don't have to worry about if one tag breaks. I'll put this in a more direct or concrete um, context. So to provide just an example, last week we had an issue with a client changed some things on the back end, which affected some of the timing for when different things were being pushed into the data layer. So they recognized an issue of one particular tag not collecting um, transaction values when on conversion pages. So when those tags were firing, it was very easy to check, go in, run a quick test, look at the data layer for um, on that confirmation page and be able to identify, okay, the structure here is okay, but the timing has changed. So we were triggering the tags for that particular client on the default gtm.js, which is the default page view trigger within Google Tag Manager. But we were able to identify that, hey, this transaction information wasn't being pushed until after that event was happening. So it was one quick check, one change to that to the timing for when that tag would fire, and because all of our conversion tags were all um, structured to fire on that same thing, and we're pulling in the exact same variables within the tag management system, all being referenced in the TMS. It's enabled us to make that change and that fix in 2 minutes, which significantly reduces the time of any sort of data outage that's occurring there. As opposed to if each tag is doing its own thing, you have to go through each and every single one, and it could take a day, 2 days, and a lot of development resources to be able to fix those different things. So we've covered what it is, what is the data layer, why it's important, why you need one, and why you need it to be clean and well structured. We'll now get into what the structure of it looks like and some of those key aspects that you want to make sure that you for sure have in there. So the structure, just very basic here. Essentially what you'll need is page information. So information about the page that is being viewed, events that are being pushed in to show things like impressions, product views, quick views is another thing, something that an action a user can take that will cause a site action within the page. It's not causing a whole new page load. So being able to push in those different sorts of events, as well as obviously critically for an e-commerce site, product information. Here on the right hand side, you can see just an example. First object within that array just has some user information, logged in status with some page information, page type, if there's a user ID, if they're a known user, as well as user type, which would be guest since they're not logged in. If they were logged in, it might be member. That second object there, event gtm.js, that's again just a default timing event that GTM will pass in there. But that allows you to trigger different tags. And then if we had products on this particular page, you might have there in that third object e-commerce information, so product information, any views, any impressions of different products. One thing to note, the structure of your data layer is going to typically be informed by the web analytics platform that you're using. A really good example of this is Google Analytics, which I know a lot of people use, and their enhanced e-commerce capabilities. So by putting the data in the structure defined within that enhanced e-commerce documentation, what you're able to do is just enable enhanced e-commerce both within the Google Analytics interface, as well as when you're setting up the tag and Google Analytics, the analytics.js tag will automatically grab the product information, transaction information, as long as it's within that structure that's defined. So it can save you, if you're using GA, by structuring your data layer in the way in which it should be from an organization standpoint, save you a lot of work when it comes to actual tag implementation as well as troubleshooting. Just make sure that the data elements are there, that they're correct, and that they're in the proper format, and everything else will automatically be taken care of for you. If you're really leaning on another web analytics platform, then I would strongly suggest structuring the data layer in the way that is optimal for that, because that's really what's being leveraged by the most teams throughout the organization. That was just high level what you need within the data layer: that product information, page information, user information. We're now getting into some of the critical data points that you'll want to have within each. So when it comes to page information, you're going to want page type. So is it a home page? Is it a category page, product display page, blog page, content, whatever it may be? You want to be able to define that, as well as the page name. Again, that would be, say it's a category list page for books. If you have an e-commerce site that sells books, you'll want to define each page with the unique name, as well as that page type. And you'll want to do this because there are a lot of different tags and a lot of different events that you'll want to fire conditionally. So you'll only want to fire them when it's a product page, or when it's the home page, or when it's a checkout page. By defining the page type and the page name, you can define those conditions within your firing rules, or within your triggers for firing those tags. And this allows you to just conditionally fire tags only when they're needed to optimize performance. You don't have as much things firing, so you don't have as much bandwidth being used by different platforms, as well as just for cleanliness of data. I mean, you don't want product views being sent up and recorded within your different platforms if it's not a product page. Some other information there that should be pushed in with the page information is your user type, user status. So if they're logged in, if they're logged out, if they're a member, not a member, that sort of thing. And then some optional information that is very helpful when it comes to a lot of third-party tags. Hashed email. So a lot of different third-party platforms will want email pulled up within the tags. I always recommend that you go ahead and hash it when placing in the data layer, just for security purposes. More than anything else, you never want user information sitting there that is just clear text. So hashed email, being able to push that in, a number of, especially if you're doing like email marketing and you're using a third-party platform to help manage that and optimize that, hashed email is very helpful. User ID, if you're capturing it. A lot of times we have a number of clients now that are wanting to get into online, offline, back-end integration. So being able to identify the customer path both on the website as well as offline. So if you're putting information about users into a CRM system, for example, by placing user ID within the data layer, it then makes it available for your analytics platform and other third-party digital marketing platforms to be able to pull in. And then you can marry that data on the back end with CRM data to be able to get that full picture, 360-degree view of the user. Geolocation can be helpful, again, for the use of conditionally firing tags. If you're only using a particular attribution platform, or whatever it may be, if you're only doing a certain marketing activity for users in coming from a particular location, if you have the geolocation there, with that page information, the data layer, again, you can conditionally fire those platforms to only collect information when a user is coming from that place where you're running or utilizing that tool. Critical data points when it comes to product information. You want to have the product name, the product category, and the subcategory. So just classifications for what that product is, and that's so you can really drill down and start doing reporting on a category basis. One of the optional pieces that we have in there, if applicable, there is brand. That can be very similar to your product category, but you're able to really get a more granular look within analytics by placing that information there about the products within the data layer. You also want to have product SKU, product price, really any additional information that you have about a product that is available. If you place that within the data layer, again, it's just more easily accepted, and easily used by the different tags. These critical pieces are so you can get much more granular with your conversion tracking as well as impression tracking. And some optional pieces here would be like the stock or supply. With a lot of our e-commerce clients, we'll really push them to, if they can get it in there pretty easily, put in how many products are remaining from an inventory standpoint. You can do some real interesting analysis with that information by being able to pull it into web analytics. Also the variant, so if it's different colors of a particular product, more contextual information, and then also if a coupon is applicable, one in the transaction, and then two even just for a particular view of a product. The more data points you can get in there, the more that's available to use with the different tags, and the more granular and flexible analysis you can then do once it comes to analytics, attribution, everything. I'd be remiss if I did not touch a little bit on content information. So if you don't have an e-commerce site, if you're maybe have a publishing site or just a purely a content site, some information that you'll definitely want to put in the data layer to be available. Information such as article title, article author, category. Again, just so you can see, okay, what are my users consuming on the site? How much engagement are different areas getting? Being able to placing that in there, again, makes it available, which you can then analyze. Additionally, you're going to be wanting to push events to the data layer. So we have the automatic timing events in Google Tag Manager. Just use that as an example because I know most sites will use it because if for nothing else, it's free. You have the automatic timing events of GTM.js, which is when GTM is first initiated, aka the default page view trigger within GTM. You have GTM.dom, which is a timing event for when the page DOM load is complete. And then you have GTM.loaded, which is the window loaded event, which is when all the content, everything is loaded on the page. So you can use those default events, obviously within GTM, but it's also very, very helpful to push in your own events attached to the product information, page information that you're pushing in there. So product view along with your product information to push an event product view so that you can trigger tags to fire immediately when that data is available. And also simplifies some of the timing issues, kind of going back to that client issue that I had mentioned previously. We could, once that event is there, we could just trigger tags based on that. You wouldn't have to worry about timing events being an issue for different tags loading. Also being able to push impression events. So as opposed to on an e-commerce site, firing impressions or firing product information for every single product that is listed in a category page, but instead to use like scroll-based impression tracking. So only when a particular product is within view on a user's browser at that point to push in impression information so that it's actually seen as opposed to simply loaded on the page. But by pushing in then an impression event with that information, again, you can fire different tags on those impression events. So you're only tracking what's actually seen on a page. And then obviously you're going to want to push a purchase event with any transaction information so that you can fire those tags immediately when that information is pushed in there. Getting into a little bit of leveraging the data layer with your tag management system. So within a tag management system, the basics are that you're going to have your variables, which are the dynamic values that can be populated within the tag management system. You're also going to have your triggers or firing rules, and then you're going to have your actual tags. So all of these things, all these different pieces within a TMS, you're going to want to reference the data layer and point and populate these things with the data available within the data layer. So I've covered why it's super important to have all that information there and make it available. Now it's just about leveraging it. So with variables, what you're able to do, and all these examples again are from Google Tag Manager, but very similar with other tag management systems. With variables, what you're able to do is just define the variable name and then set it up to as a data layer variable. So it automatically will reference your data layer object, and then you can then just define the value that you want to have. Now this is right here is an example from a client using Google Analytics, Google Tag Manager, and the structure is properly implemented for the e-commerce, for enhanced e-commerce. So as opposed to having to scrape the page, pull from the actual creative or product listing on the page for a particular product, because all that information is within the data layer, what we're able to do is just reference it within that array. So what this variable is going to be doing is looking in the data layer, looking in the e-commerce object in the data layer, down to the detail portion, the products portion, and then for the first one, the name. This variable then within GTM, whenever a product page is viewed, is going to be automatically populated then with that product name. So all I have to do now within the tags, and I'll show an example of this here in a minute, is place the variable for EEPDP product name, which is what I've named it as, within the tag wherever it's needed for a product name to be pushed in with a product view, and that product name will automatically be populated within there and then sent up with the request. So I have that for analysis. The second piece here is setting up your triggers and firing rules within the data layer and then within the TMS to be pointed at the data layer. So here, this is just an example for a product click and a quick view. Now, again, this is one of those elements that are going to happen within the page. It's not going to be a fully reloaded page. So when I push in the product information for that particular product view, for the quick view, I'm going to also want that data layer.push, which we'll cover here in a second, but I want that to contain an event equals product click. What I can then do is set up a trigger within my tag management system to look for on any page whenever a product click event happens. It will then trigger tags that have this particular firing rule applied. So by kind of goes back to by pushing in those events to the data layer, I'm then able to conditionally fire tags when that particular event happens. Now, quick view is actually, it's just a little aside, but quick view is really critical because a ton of pretty much every e-commerce platform now offers these, um, and most sites leverage it. But traditionally, it can be a little bit difficult because it's something again that happens within the page. Um, Leveraging that data layer really simplifies the process of accurately being able to see how often those happen. And because on many sites they're happening a lot, you're able to get all that product information on those views, even though they're not going to the full product page. And even if they're adding, a product to the cart from that category page. Um, the final piece here is then incorporating this within tags. So I know a lot of tag management systems now have like templates, which makes it even easier than the example that I've given here. But all you have to do is enter in these macros or the variables as opposed to full scripts within each tag to really go and find that information. So since I've already set up and I'm already referencing the data layer with those variables or macros within my tag management system, I can just reference those macros within the tag. So this is an example of the product view event for Facebook, and how the Facebook tag works. If everyone's using the new Facebook Pixel, which if you're not, you should be, because it allows a lot of additional audience segmentation and targeting capabilities. But one of the things with the new Facebook Pixel is it allows you to fire up events um, for individual users as they complete those events and those actions on your website. This is like I mentioned, the product view. So it's tracking view content, content type product. But with that, I'm able to add additional context information around the content ID. So the product ID, product name, product category, product price. And for the implementation here, it I can implement because I have the data layer set up and I'm leveraging it within my tag management system. You can do a full implementation of the Facebook tag in less than a couple of hours, even if you're going through and using all of the different events that are available within that platform. So it really goes back to when it comes to importance, simplicity of implementation. One, you don't need a full-blown developer to be able to set this up after that initial setup of the tag management system. You, as just a marketing person or an analytics person, could set this up with a small amount of tag management system training. A couple of things here with implementation, and I know some language here throughout the discussion about pushing information to the data layer, defining the data layer. That's just what I want to cover here. So when you're implementing the data layer, that information, going back to that original photo of the garage that I showed, it's everywhere. It's all over the place. So how do we get it into that object? So the first thing that you're going to want to do is define the data layer object on every single page. So what this does is it just initiates the data layer. So it creates the toolbox, if you will. You only want to do that once because anytime you define data layer and create that toolbox, if you define it again, it's going to overwrite and create a new one. So you just define it one time on the page, and that should happen very first. Now, when you define, it should happen as the very first thing on the page. Now, when you define the data layer, just obviously set it up as an array, but you also want that to contain the page information. And realistically, if it's available at that point, you can also push in all that product information. What this allows you to do is that those basics, the primary information is already there and already available for any tag to use. Throughout different events or different interactions with the page, or as other data points become available, what you're able to then do is just to push those additional data points to the array, which are datalayer.push commands when those different actions happen. So to think about what, or kind of how this works, essentially you define your data layer first, which is the creation of that toolbox, and it's empty, it just has the basics. Then as you push additional information in there, that's when you're putting in the different tools and you're putting in the data points um, to that array, but also you can think of it as the as like a container, or in the context of the toolbox. That's when you're adding in those additional tools. One thing that is important to note, and it should go without saying, but data has to be available within the data layer at the time of the tag execution for it to be um, properly grabbed and used. We see it all the time with clients. Um, they'll push information into the data layer, but it's too late for it to actually be used by tags. And in our toolbox example, this would be like if you're going to start a project and you need a hammer, but a hammer hasn't been placed within the toolbox yet. You can't use it. Um, Same thing with the data layer. If you have product information being pushed in, but it's not being pushed in until you know the very bottom of the page or the very end of the page load, you're not going to be able to fire tags on that very first timing element of the page being initiated. Um, you're not going to be able to fire tags there and then contain that product information. It has to be available, and it's one really critical thing to look at when testing, um, as well as when putting together a plan for implementation. As far as from an implementation standpoint, getting data points to the data layer, that all happens on the back end. It's going to be a little bit different based upon what the data point is, what platform you're using, and just other kind of technical specifics of your situation. And that's really, developers definitely need to be involved in that process to be able to make those data points available. But then from the management perspective, moving forward, just takes a more, technically savvy marketer, or just someone trained on basics of tag management system. And now that you have an understanding of what the data layer is and how it works, it could be you. One little caveat that I would be remiss for not mentioning when it comes to implementation and setting this up is for single page applications. And I know a lot of sites are now moving to this framework. But with a single page application, due to how it works, and for those of you that are not familiar with what I'm talking about, a single page application is essentially when a page is loaded one time, and then while you might have the illusion of moving two different pages, it's not fully refreshing. So you might click on a link on a site, page isn't fully refreshed, so it's not a full new page load, but then the content is delivered there. So when implementing the data layer, what you're going to want to do in that case is on each new virtual page, essentially, you're going to want to push in a new page view event. You're not going to want to redefine the data layer. If you redefine the data layer, that's that situation, like I mentioned, where everything that had been pushed there previously is going to be wiped out, and only that basic information that you're pushing in, or even if it's an empty array, is going to be available there. So you just want to push in new page view events with the additional contextual information. One other little caveat here, because the data layer isn't fully refreshed, um, if you have a new dynamic value that should be replacing a on a new page that should be replacing this different value for the same like variable or key value pair for the same key. If you have a new value for the same key as previously, you're going to want to push that in anew, obviously, so it overwrites that and then is available for that new page view hit in analytics or product view, whatever it may be. So that's our overview of the data layer, what it is, how it works, and some of the important aspects that you're definitely going to want to ensure that you have available within there. Just to offer a quick summary, I think the easiest and the best way to really solidify this idea is that the data layer is that container or layer within that sits between your websites and the different applications and platforms that you're using, that houses everything that you need, all the data points that you need to collect and then to do effective analysis. The best way to think about this is going back to that garage and that toolbox example. Taking everything that is super unorganized and all over the place, putting it in one central place in a standard format to then be used for any different platform or any different project that you need. And with that, we will get into any questions. Let me pull this up. Okay. So it looks like we have a couple. First one, how to check the data layer. So to check different values that are within there on your website now. I'm assuming that this is in the context of if you're doing like an audit, or even if you're just wanting to check out a new site, working on a new implementation. So let me just go to our InfoTrust website. I'll show you an actual example of the easiest way to manually check this. But then you can also use automated tools such as Tag Inspector. We have the ability to validate data layers. So manually, when you're going through and how to check this is if you just go to your website, right click on the page and click Inspect. That's going to bring up your development tools within your browser. And I'm using Chrome. But once you have that up, and it's the same thing for it within Firefox as well as Safari, and you go to your console, what you're able to do here is just type in, as long as you know the name. If someone's using Google Tag Manager, 95% chance that the name of the data layer is just going to be data layer. But if you type that in to your console and then hit enter, it will return that full object. So you can then click down there and then you can see within that array all the different events, values. It's just a home page, so scroll action looks like is set up. But that will allow you to go in and see everything that is contained in there. If it's a product page, you should be seeing product information contained within there, obviously. Any of those other key elements around page information, user information that we'd gone through earlier. But that's how you can manually check if you want to see, okay, what's available to me now? What do I need to add in there? And then also, like I mentioned, you can use a tool such as Tag Inspector. Within Tag Inspector and our real-time capability, what you can do is create rules pointed to the data layer just to make sure that that data layer object contains, matches, equals those different values, variables that should be within there on a particular page. And what we do is then automatically validate that. So when a user hits a particular page or completes a particular action, we make sure that um, those values are contained within that object as they should be with per your definition. Second question, it looks like just asking about some common issues that we've seen. So the biggest things are, biggest things probably timing, that the timing piece that I had referenced. So making sure that data is available within the data layer by the time that a tag is needing to use it. And when I talk about timing, and a lot of times people will be like, well, I'm looking at the data layer and everything's there. But to use like this example right here, since I already have it up, so if I have say I have Google Analytics firing on the default page view setting within, or trigger within Google Tag Manager, what that is doing is it's looking for this gtm.js event. If I have information that is pushed into the data layer after it, meaning that it's a later object, and this is all in, even though it appears pretty much instantly, it's all pushed in order. So 0 is first, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I wanted to pull in like this event action category label within Google Analytics, and I had variables looking for those, so I wanted these values, but I was firing my tag on gtm.js, this stuff wouldn't be there yet. So I couldn't grab it to then send up. And I hope that makes sense. Usually we'll see this in the context of like transaction information or product information. But that's probably the biggest thing we see. And the biggest way of getting around that is by pushing in events with the information that you're wanting to have, so that you can just trigger your tag on event GA scroll, and then obviously all that information is going to be available because it's all being pushed in at the same time. Another common issue that we'll see is product ID issues, and not necessarily with the data layer. Well, it has to do with the data layer, but the product ID issues that we see most often are the product IDs that you're pushing into the data layer not matching the like category or product feeds that you're then pushing um, into other systems. So when that happens, when say within Facebook, when you're trying to get some additional product contextual information from like your backend e-commerce uh, solution, how within the Facebook platform it's going to marry that data together is it's going to use that product ID as a key. So the product ID needs to be in the same format and needs to be coming from the same place within your category feed or your product feed that you're sending to your third-party solution, as well as to what's being pushed into the data layer. A lot of times we'll see a mismatch there. There might be, an individual product SKU versus like a full, product ID for everything within that category. So you want to make sure that those things are the same, but that's another common issue. It looks like, one more question. Someone asking about the single page application, using a single page application site, some of the implications. Okay. Yeah, so, and that's briefly had covered it there within that implementation piece, but just a few things to really look out for and to reiterate is one, only define the data layer once on the full page load. And then because it's not refreshing, it's not going to clear that object. So you're just going to want to continue to push in, but making sure that on each new virtual page view, you're pushing in that page view event. Otherwise, if you're using, again with the Google Tag Manager example, a lot of times we'll see people with, when first setting up everything with the single page application, we'll just use that page view default trigger within Google Analytics. The only time that's going to fire is on that very, very first initial page view when a user reaches the site or if they ever refresh. Without those new page view events, you're not going to get impressions um, or views of any of those virtual pages that a user's navigating through on the site. So yeah, I hope that helps. And it looks like, not seeing any more. Looks like we're about out of time. So yeah, if there are any other outstanding questions, what I will do is just grab those. We'll jot those down and I can follow up with you individually. If you have any questions at all, and if you're having any issues with like monitoring of the data layer validation, let us know with that as well, and we can show you exactly how Tag Inspector can help with that. Be more than happy to go through that. So, or if you just have any other general data layer tag management questions at all, shoot me an email, let me know, and I'm happy to connect and go through those. One other thing to note, so we will be continuing our webinar series. I believe next week is another Tag Inspector training webinar. So if you're using the tool or just want to learn more about it, join us for that, and we'll go through some different aspects of Tag Inspector. And then I believe here in a couple weeks, we have another educational webinar. So be on the lookout for the emails for registering for that. And we'll look forward to seeing you on those future webinars. Thank you very much.